So we're going to basically break this down into 4 different steps. We're going to talk a lot about design, which I think is a very critical part of actually building a people-centered type SharePoint environment. Structure and some of the things you can do there to kind of help both your contributors, but also your end users and that kind of stuff. We're going to talk about adoption a little bit, and we'll talk about some of the things that you need to be thinking about when you do these things, and then also communication on top of that. So let's talk a little bit about it from the design side. So anybody who attended my session yesterday, I talked a lot about how to be able to figure out who your people are and that kind of stuff. You're actually probably, I've done many conferences where I've done 2 sessions that are along the same topic. You guys may actually be the first time that I don't have one repeat slide in my slide deck from my previous one, because usually there's a point I need to remake, but I thought these had a really good break point. But kind of picking up from where I left off there, where we're talking about planning about people, now we actually talk about actually putting this plan into action, actually building something that goes along. So from a design side, we really look at user experience. And so user experience, though I'm trying to get away from using the word user, because I think user kind of helps us in IT be a little bit insulated from that there's a person at the end of that computer and that they actually have feelings and thoughts and wants and needs and that kind of stuff. So when we call them a user, we kind of see them as just this digital interface versus calling them people, which is what they really are. So from this side, from a user experience best practice, this is something I've been doing for a really long time. And it really kind of goes through a whole gambit of processes. Yesterday we talked about really understanding your content, your audiences, how you can go through some information architecture activities and understanding your content better, and really this whole gambit from requirements to really figuring out what you need to do. So the important thing is this can be kind of the longest process in the entire system of actually building out something that's people-centered, yet at the same time, we haven't even got into building anything yet. So if we do a really good job up here, that should be informing a lot of the things we do down here and actually make for a very good process in how we do things. So one of the first things we look at really from a design side is that kind of wireframe step. Now, there's a lot of different theories about wireframing, whether it's good or bad or anything like that. I'll tell you why I really like this from really understanding our people and making sure we get things right. And it's exactly right here. It's black and white in that. And so you're going to find that the 2 major things that really affect initial user experience is going to be layout and color. And actually looking at them independently can be very valuable, because the first thing you want to understand is that people understand their navigation. Do they understand the way the page is laid out? Can they see the differentiation from the different components on the page? Does it make sense? Would they click here? Would they do that? But what you find really fast is that if you look at that with a bunch of colors and graphics and everything like that, you can get a very different experience than just understanding, does this whole methodology make sense? So I like to use wireframing. Typically I'll use a tool like Balsamiq. In that, if you've ever heard of Balsamiq, it's a great tool. It's not very expensive. It's very easy to rapid prototype. But we also use, for a lot of our more advanced stuff, we use a software called Azure. And Azure actually is a product that you can actually get and actually create functional wireframes. So now you can actually take your wireframes to the next step. And so if I click on one of these different navigational links, it's going to pull down some kind of navigation, and you can actually take it to another step. So what is really valuable about this process and what really helps is it lets us know, are we positioning things on the page well? Are we actually making things make sense to people? Is the wording we're using making sense? Versus then bringing in design, which can then have a different effect on the overall user experience. So a lot of times we'll go through this process, we'll try different layouts, we'll get in front of people and actually get their feedback on that and make refinements from that point on kind of what we're going to do. This happens to be a public website that we did this for, but the principle is very much the same as if we're looking at an internal system. I've not only done this for just intranets when you think of the traditional internet and you really think of it from the standpoint of people just finding information, but we also do this for team site structures and everything. It can be a very effective tool. And I like to start at a static level and actually get people feedback from a static version, but then sometimes we'll go to a more functional level because we like to make sure, especially if we're going to have some type of special functionality that maybe takes some type of unique path that maybe it's just not clicking on a link and going somewhere, but it's actually completing some type of task that maybe has a more complex steps to it. We'll a lot of times put it in a more functional base inside our wireframes so that we can actually test that interaction and see that it actually makes sense to people. And again, the real value of this is we're doing this all before we built anything. So the traditional way that we do things in IT is we come up with the ideas, we work with people, we sit there and say this is what it's going to look like. We build it all and then we release it to people, and then people don't like it or they didn't understand it. And we're like, okay, what do? Well, we got to go back and rebuild the entire thing. So we like to do a lot of steps, and that's what I really encourage you to do. Before you build anything, things that don't take a lot of time, you can go through this process and really do it. And the same thing on the mobile side. So this ends up being equally important. If you're going to actually do some kind of mobile, and I'm going to talk about that later, so my opinions of mobile in an internet scenario. But if you're going to do mobile, again, it's the same thing. People don't understand that that is equally important, that you've got to be testing, you've got to be looking at how things function on that side, like that. But more so about how you prioritize your content, because just because your page is laid out one way doesn't mean that from a mobile experience you want it laid out the same, because you may have different priorities that you need to really be hitting those mobile users from. So one of the things to say about mobile is remember that it's about people and not about your SharePoint site. So how many of you actually have some type of mobile experience in your SharePoint environment? Okay, there's a few. How many of you think that's a really awesome thing? Okay, there's 1, 2, 3, nah. So one of the things that I said yesterday that I'm going to resonate again today is the one thing about mobile is mobile's really not about what we think about. There are not a lot of people inside an internal scenario that want to actually look at a phone. In that. Like I said, if I'm heading to the loo and I'm getting ready to go, I don't want to get on the phone and read the latest company news. What you find is that what a lot of people, when they use the word mobile, they think of tablets. Now, we understand that the interfaces in SharePoint on a browser on a desktop and a browser on a tablet are not very different anymore. As a matter of fact, one of the #1 annoyances people have in tablets is if they open up something on a tablet and it shows you the mobile UI. It's really annoying because it's like, I can see everything, I just want it to work like a desktop. So you want to first make sure that that's actually what they want. The other thing that you have to do is make sure that it's process-based. So otherwise, the one thing that we make a mistake is we sit there and we have all this internet information and all these different things, and we put it all in this mobile interface so that I can sit there on my screen and scroll down and scroll down and scroll down and scroll down. This has become a great activity. And we think because we see people do this all the time that they're willing to do this on our internal systems. But what studies have really found is that people won't. Yes, on Facebook when I'm looking and I want to explore everything my friends are saying, maybe I'm willing to swipe down a few times. But overall, from the standpoint of actual functional, I'm actually doing this for a job, I want it right at my fingertips. So a lot of times in building mobile internal systems, we're actually going more process-based, or we're looking at the tasks that they really want to complete, something that they really want to get to. And we want to put that up top or be the only part of that mobile interface. So the mobile interfaces that we've built for intranets very few times has been about the intranet proper, but been more about specific functionality that we could see people wanting to do from their mobile phones. The other thing that I find ironic in the mobile environment is how many companies implement mobile into intranets that are locked down and inaccessible from outside the organization. So that means not only can I get it on my phone, but now I have to be at my office to get it on my phone, and I've got a desktop there, and I've got a tablet that I carry around with me, and yet now I can also get it on my phone. Executives think that's cool, but overall it tends to be very useless from that side. So you've got to look at these different things about that. But the thing that really needs to happen is that if you are going to have that mobile experience, is you've really got to have that fidelity across the channels. Otherwise, if I do things one way in the browser on a desktop, another way in the browser on a tablet, and another way on my phone, you're not giving users a ubiquitous experience. They're having to constantly figure out and change the way they're doing things. And we see that a lot in mobile. Yes, there are certain things like you're not going to have this long navigation across the top. You're going to fold it into a drop-down menu and those kind of things. But overall, if I do something here, I should feel like I can do it on my other devices. So overall, a lot of organizations are finding that it's great to think about investing in mobile in an intranet scenario, but overall, it just isn't real practical nor very useful for people. So the first thing you really want to understand is it going to be useful for your people to actually access things on their mobile phone in your intranet scenario? If it is, then you need to put the effort to make that work well. If you're not willing to do that, then I'm still going to argue don't do mobile at all in that, because I see a lot of mobile experiences, even on public websites, that are just crap because people tried to duplicate their website on a mobile phone and nobody cared. Whoops. I seem to have lost my ability to click. Let's try here. There we go. So when we go to the design side, the overall point of this is really be creative. This is the one thing that also drives me crazy from an intranet scenario. If you're actually going to invest the time and effort into it, you've got to do something really cool in that. And it doesn't have to be that it's an extremely elaborate design. Again, this is a public website because most of our clients won't allow us to show their design, sorry. From that side, you need to be creative and you need to be different. A lot of times what I see in an intranet scenario, or really even a public website scenario, is somebody builds one design, they're kind of like, that's the direction we're going to go. A lot of times you need to really go through this step. So actually when we do this process, we'll tend to build 3 or 4 designs that are all very, very different on the way that they look and feel. They have the same content, a lot of times the same information, but they have a very different look and feel. And you can see where each of these kind of portrays a very different feel about this particular site. The good thing is you have something now that you can actually go back to people and actually get really, really good feedback on. The bad thing is you've got to have a creative team that can do this kind of work and really take it up there. But overall, like I said yesterday, the one big thing from design is you really want to have a design that really highlights out the information, and that you can very easily define the different components and can see through those, versus say like what's on the current out-of-the-box team side in SharePoint 2013, where you have a bunch of white space with just a little bit of blue and you don't really know. And so if anybody's curious, and much to my surprise, because I usually, before I put anything in front of a client, I know which design they're going to pick, they actually picked this one in that, so for this particular one, which was kind of surprising, and it's probably the more retro looking site in there. But overall, what you do is you kind of go through this process, and then again, as I said yesterday, you go through an iterative process where you take it one step, you get feedback, you take it another step, you get feedback, and then you take it to that last step. And that's really the important part. They don't have to be as elaborate a designs as this. You know, there's going to be some that it's much simpler, but overall, getting that feedback at each stage of the game and not just limiting yourself to one conversation with your people can just make such a difference, because you sit there and say, you know, I like where this sits, but it doesn't seem to really resonate what it is, or I don't understand this sentence. Now that you put an image behind it, I don't really understand what that means anymore, because the image doesn't really represent the activity. So you can really learn a lot from this by going through this process and really bringing it into a very cohesive design in which you've actually done a lot of testing from start to finish. And when you're actually building your final product, you actually feel like you already understand what you need to build and how it's going to work. So there's a very big value from going from this side and really understanding design from start to finish. And design doesn't start with pretty pictures. Design starts with talking with somebody and really understanding their wants and needs and how that's going to fit into your scenario, and really walking it through the entire process. So in a scenario where we do work, this is actually the longest part of the project, from actually understanding things to getting to a final design. We consider building things in SharePoint very easy. That's the easy part of this whole gambit, because SharePoint, where it has many, many flaws, if you just want to build something out, you can build something out, and it doesn't take a ton of time. But getting there where you can actually understand what to build out and what's going to really be useful for your people is such a critical step on that side. So when we go from the design side, so now we've got our design, we've figured out what our people want, now we need to build it. And so one of the reasons I kind of bring this piece into the side is because one of the things that we forget a lot, and we used to do this a lot in the web world, is that we forgot that there's actually 2 types of people that use an intranet. You have the people that view things, which is usually a majority of your people, the people that actually look at stuff, and then you have the people that put stuff there. in that. And so there's two ways that I see that an intranet scenario, or really any type of SharePoint system, really goes wrong. You focus too much on the people putting the information in, or you focus too much on the people looking at the information. And so the cool thing about SharePoint 2013 in particular is that there's some really cool things that we can do around structure to make it actually easy on both of them. So when we look at structure, has anybody here ever worked with a web content management system out there? Okay, so a few people here. So the real strength of a web content management system is this right here. It's your ability to separate storage from presentation. Otherwise, a lot of times when we think about building things in SharePoint, you think create page, add text, create page, add text. But that's actually a very limiting factor because now you have all this structural stuff that you have to take care of. Well, what happens in the scenario that you have content that actually needs to exist more in one place? Or you have pieces of content that need to exist more in one place? Or you need a link to a page that needs to be in 5 different locations? Well, in the rote world, we're actually building something that's very hard to manage going forward because now I've got to go change it here, here, and here, versus having some type of centralized storage system that I can store and then use some type of methodology to pull that information out and show it where we want. So the great thing about separating storage from presentation is that we're able to take content and make it very reusable in that. And so in a lot of scenarios, you're not going to have one place that information always exists when people are looking for it, because there's a lot of similar scenarios that people might look at from there. So the great thing I love about 2013 is 2013 was the first version of SharePoint that easily could allow us to allow authors to store information wherever they want and actually pull it in the way we want to show it. So that's and so we're going to talk a little bit about roll-up technologies. In 2010, 2007, we had the content query web part, which is still a great piece, but it's very limiting compared to the content search web part and a lot of the things that we can do in 2013. So right here is probably a very good example of actually looking at things from different sources. So this was actually a client that we did. It was actually a collegiate system in the States that has there. But all this information, everything here is dynamically generated, and it's actually being pulled out from a bunch of different repositories. And not only repositories, but repositories not in SharePoint. A lot of this information that's coming up, so if you click on a lot of this benefits information, you're actually popping up out of SAP. If you're clicking on the task, this is something stored for each of the individual users to be able to look at that. It's customized to what they chose, what their most frequent things are. Their calendar knows who they are and that kind of stuff. And then if you're a new employee, you get a checklist that kind of goes through all the process. But overall, the whole point is that none of this information is stored in the same location. It's all from different areas, but it's being brought into a cohesive interface so that me as the employee of this organization only have one screen I have to go to actually figure out what I need to do. And that's very important because a lot of times when we build our really complex structures and we have everybody who owns these different information, well, go to human resources for this, go to marketing for this, go to accounting for this, go to this group for that. And you start having people that need to jump all those places, and that tends to be a very painful process. As a matter of fact, here's a very good example of that. Very simple, but something we see a lot, where you have things like an expense sheet. Well, you know, you could have an area called My Employment, and there could be people that want to go in there because it's about me being the employee. But you could have more of those structural thinkers, the people that actually work for human resources or understand that want to go to the human resources and find that as well, or it could be your finance department or whatever. These are the exact same pieces of information, but they're being used and shown differently. And so the real power of a system like SharePoint is to really look at that from a storage structure versus a presentation structure, serve both groups, yet not create a lot of complexity on your side. So when you look at this, you might go, oh my God, there's a ton of different stuff on here. But overall, when you look at this, actually this is a system where you just have a few lists and a few libraries, and you're actually pulling information across that in there. So you can have very simplistic storage structures, which is really great for content contributors, because content contributors don't want to put a lot of effort into it. As a matter of fact, one of the things, we did a project with an engineering firm a while ago, and engineers absolutely think that everything else is beneath them, and that the only activities that you should put any effort into is the ones that they actually do. So they wanted this huge system where they could store all these files and do all this kind of stuff, but they wanted to put absolutely no effort into it. It's like, I want to send the file up and I want it to know exactly where it's supposed to go and put it there. And I said, well, that's going to cost a lot of money. In this unique case, they actually said, okay, that's fine, as long as my engineers don't have to put any effort in because they'll complain. And I was like, well, if you're going to do this so that people don't complain, that's fine with me. But overall, from a storage structure, you can do a lot of centralized storage or a lot of diverse storage, and you can create simple structures. So one of the important things, and the reason I kind of show this, is because there's two things that really come from there. And it really comes to that content deployment scenario. So we've done a lot of scenarios where, like this, where we're crossing site collections, we're crossing web apps, sometimes we're even crossing farms, and we're actually pulling information up through different layers through the search mechanism in SharePoint 2013. So there's only two ways you can do this. Either one, you have a very structural system, so otherwise you have a structure that you can understand and follow. That is a traditional method of doing it and has its benefits if you don't have a lot of complex information that need to show a lot of different places. But if you do, then what you have on the other side is you have to follow discipline. And this is where it starts getting tough for content contributors because they want their stuff to sit in their place. It's what I call that mine, mine, mine principle. It's my stuff. I want it there because it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. In that. But overall, from that side, well, that's fine. Let you store it here, but now you need to do this, this, and this so that I can understand that content and actually pull it to where I need it to be. And so you can get into extremely complex scenarios on that, but the one benefit is, especially who in here is in government? Okay, I've got a couple more this time around there. This is a very traditional scenario in government because government really needs to have that ownership. You know, they like to pet their content. You know, it's like, this is in my area and nobody can touch it. This is my little fiefdom and I can own it. And there, well, I work with a lot of government agencies, and this is one of the powers that I can say, you bet, store it here, but now I need you to tag it with these 3 pieces of metadata so that I can actually pull it and show it to somebody else in another place so that they don't have to come down into your teen site to see it. And so there's a lot of power around that in really what we can do from that side. So we really have that content deployment where we can look at whether we're going to push information or whether we're going to be pulling it up the hierarchy, where you could have a very, very simple structure of pages up top that's pulling a lot of information from a lot of different sources, but the end user really has no idea that this is actually happening. All they're going is to a single page and they're like, oh, here's all the information I needed. And that it's really cool that they decided to put this all right here. Well, it's not right there because down here we have these teams that want their little fiefdoms, and we have a very different thing in that. And then from a content presentation side, you really can look at that things can get very simple. So you look at that. This was actually a demo site that I created a number of years ago. So if you're seeing and you're like, what the hell are these pages like? So it was just kind of some fun things that I did when I was first working with content search web part. But from that side, you can have a very, very simple structure for people to utilize. And so when that really comes into play, and how you do this, so you build this structure and you understand it, is really you can use the modularness of SharePoint. So again, when you go back to web content management systems, the one thing that's really good at them is that you build different components that you can reuse over and over to do different things. Well, SharePoint actually gives you a lot of mechanisms to be able to do that same type of work without having to put a lot of effort into it so that you can create it. And so from that side, it really does two things. One, we create a consistency of experience. Otherwise, if I'm looking at your stuff or I'm looking at his stuff, it's consistently being displayed and it follows some type of consistency. So each time I go to a page, I don't have to worry about, well, now I've got to learn how these guys decided to put this on the page. In that. So you've got some kind of structure there. And the other thing is now you've got the flexibility. So now if you want to change it down the road or you decide you're not going to roll out mobile now, but you're going to roll out later, having the modularness pieces of SharePoint, which I'm going to go through each one and kind of talk through it, allows you to really be able to have that flexibility so that you can make changes. Because anybody that's been working in SharePoint more than 10 minutes knows there are certain decisions and certain things you can do in SharePoint that can make life really difficult to change your mind. And so using SharePoint really to the strength that it does have, no, it is not as mature as other web CMSs, but it does have the ability to really segment out the different components of how we build pages, how we build libraries, how we build everything like that, to really use that strength so that going forward we can look at things. So a lot of the ways that I do things is I don't really care what you want now. I want to see what it might grow in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years and how that's going to do it. So sometimes we may end up building things a little bit more complex because we know there's going to be growth, or sometimes we might build it simple, but we build it simple in the way that we know that once they need to go complex, that they don't have to reinvent the wheel to go through that process. So the first and foremost, so how many people in here, at least, now I know this is a business track, so you yourself may not have worked with this too much, but are at least familiar with kind of the page structure in SharePoint? So quite a few people in here, that's really good. So really the most powerful piece is the master page, and up until 2013, really you couldn't do much else. Yeah, you could do a page layout, but they kind of sucked and they weren't very easy to use and that kind of stuff. One of my most fun things that I had in 2013 when I started dealing with the master pages is I was talking with some friends on the SharePoint team, and one of the things that they claimed is they said, they claimed an activity that was the first thing I wanted to do when I got the alphabets installed. So I got the alphabets installed on my system, and I went up and I opened up the default master page, which was the Seattle look that they have now. And so I opened up Seattle, I hit Control-A to select everything in it, I hit Delete, and then I relaunched the master page, and I went to my site. Nothing showed up, but the most important thing that didn't happen is I did not get an error message. And anybody who's ever touched a master page knows in 2010, 2007, and that, if you had a comma in the wrong place, it can crash your entire SharePoint system in that. And so they actually did a really good job in 2013 using this brand new language they invented called HTML, and that they came up with for 2013, and they brought it in place so that you can basically remove everything from it. Probably the most significant thing from my standpoint, saying that I build very visual SharePoint, this is actually a public website, but it is a SharePoint 2013 site that we launched a few months back. But being able to do it is that you can get rid of the ribbon in all of its entirety, which was something in 2010 we could hide, and then you had this long gap at the top that you couldn't get rid of. But from there, when we're using these different structural components, the important thing is that too many people in too many organizations use master pages for everything. Master pages' purpose is to set the tone of your site. It's to be where the global style sheets you have, the global script files. Establish the overall look and feel from a master page level so that you can carry that through the consistency of your entire site. What a lot of people do is they end up using it and really making it their page layout and everything else and storing it in one master page. Well, now you want something a little bit different over here. Well, there's another master page. And now you want something a little different over here, and there's another master page. Well, now you've got to update something across the entire site. So now I've got to update this, 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 and this. And so what you really try to do here is you really try to look at those global pieces and really try to bring it all together. The next layer down is the page layouts. This is actually your most powerful component you can possibly use. And this is my favorite thing to do, is to build really good page layouts. But page layout isn't just about how the page flows, but it's also about things that can be reused. So one of the greatest things that you can do in SharePoint, that you could actually do in SharePoint before you could do it in any type of web CMS, was you could set metadata, and then you could create a page that ties to that metadata. Otherwise, I could have an accounting page, and I could have documents in this area and that area, and lists in this area and that area that all had tagged accounting, and I can use a page layout to build a page that just shows me stuff that have been tagged with accounting. And it's actually very simple to do, because you can actually create that piece of metadata for the page itself and then have the page auto-build itself. In 2013, Microsoft did a very, very good job of bringing in the design manager and giving us some easy mechanisms to be able to reuse different components inside that to do that. But pages tend to be the look and feel of how an individual page might be laid out and the different things. And so the great thing is that you can then have multiple types of designs that you might want to, layouts that people can use, and you can allow your content creators to be able to use those different components to build the pieces kind of the way they want. And then in 2013, we have this concept of the display template. If you're in 2010, this is going to be your content query web part, and this is going to be your XSLT that you have to do. In 2013, we can do this very easily using search, and we can actually use HTML to build up very complex. But display templates are really the overall look and feel of some type of grouping of information in that. So it's really about how this all looks. And then below that, we have the item template, which is how this individual item looks. And so this is really a lot of fun. This is the part that I've really enjoyed working with SharePoint 2013, is the way I can take things and actually make very visual interfaces in SharePoint 2013, something that, yeah, I could do in 2010, but I'd spend about 4 times the amount of time to do it. In 2013, I can rebuild some really complex, really cool-looking interfaces that people can actually utilize that are usable, but I don't have to go through a lot of steps. And these are things now that people, we've been able to, one of the fun things about 2013 for us is, you know, we have people in our office that really know SharePoint, and we have people in our office that really know web, and we can actually use those web people now to actually do SharePoint, because we said, yeah, not only can we use HTML, but we can also use Dreamweaver, which is our main tool that we use, and they got really excited. So when we talk about that, we're really using content search. And how many people have at least utilized content search to a certain extent? So not a lot. Oh, okay, more than that. So the really cool thing about content search is you're really using the fast search engine behind the scenes to be able to pull this information up. And so this is really the key to being able to do content management in a SharePoint 2013 environment. Albeit, if you want it to stay fresh, you have to enable continuous crawl, which has some definite ramifications to your environments as far as the amount of content you need to crawl and what the impact is going to be around that. But for the most part, I actually find that a lot of clients, once they understand the process and that we can run crawls every, hour to 2 hours, they found that maybe that initial urgency of getting something to push out is not a big deal. We actually had a client that maybe once or twice a quarter would need to push out information a little bit more urgently than what their crawl schedule was. But they're a global organization with 80,000 employees, and they have a lot of people hitting it, and they knew that it'd be too much of an impact. So we actually built them a button that they could use whenever they wanted to actually rebuild the index that they needed to get the information on their homepage of their intranet. But it wasn't something that we enabled the continuous crawl, because what we found is that that was going to be very overtaxing, because it needed to crawl this massive system that had millions and millions of pieces of information in it, and it was just too much impact from that side. So in doing that, you really have an easy way to be able to publish that content. Like I said, leave it in one spot and push it up. So you can really take advantage of a lot of the out-of-the-box pieces. Like I said, anybody that's ever heard me speak before knows that I'm definitely not one of Microsoft's biggest proponents sometimes, especially in the way they do web content management. But for what they did from their side, they actually did a really good job this time. With the design manager that you can bring in 2013, being able to integrate with the third-party programs like Dreamweaver and actually use that to update things. Some of the things you can do with image renditions, where you can actually upload an image. You can set so that if you had something where you were wanting to show thumbnails of an image, that maybe you'd click in almost like there. The one thing you'll find out is that a lot of what they did in 2013, they took from the way that they did things before in Commerce Server, when they used to have their Commerce Server out there, because everything very much, it's a catalog. You can have thumbnail images and bigger images. You can go from summary views to detail views and that kind of stuff. All we need is an add to cart on there, and we'll be good to go and be able to do that. But by far the most powerful piece they introduced was called the Snippets Gallery. Has anybody here played in the Snippets Gallery, building out page layouts? By far the most powerful piece. It's a very easy way you can actually build predefined web parts or predefined components, predefined security trimming, audience targeting, whatever it is like that. You just go in there and you basically set the settings, and it builds the little HTML snippet that you need to just copy and paste into your master page, your page layout, your display template, wherever you might have it. It's very, very simple to use and something that's very, very powerful. And so then you have search. And so search is the other side of this thing. So as I said yesterday, you can really tell by how good your system is by if you have most people search, then you know your system sucks. If most people use your system, then you probably know your search sucks. So you've really got to find that correct balance between the two and really figure out what it is. But search is so very powerful in 2013. This isn't a real pretty slide of this, but this is actually something I'm working on right now for a public client. So we're using our own information to build it while the new structure is being built out on their website. And then we're going to be using that. But search just provides so much power around it, and especially in 2013 with the way you can do things from that side. You know, your query history, actually getting that it can actually learn from itself and learn from you and learn from other users. The refiners that you can get where you can define them by the way you kind of want to look at them. And the query rules that kind of go along with that, where you can actually specify a particular type of content. So in this particular scenario, I search on the word SharePoint. This is pulling up all my blog posts that I've done throughout there. But then we actually have this highlight block over here that actually highlights my favorite blog post on SharePoint, which was my SharePoint 2010 versus 2013 usability showdown. And this is all happening automatically. I'm not doing anything manual here. I've just set some query rules that actually tell it when to prioritize different content and that kind of stuff. And so this can really affect that end user experience and really do some really cool and powerful things. But talking about how this is done is way beyond the scope of this talk today. But if anybody's interested, I'm not a regular blogger, but here over probably about 2 weeks from now, I'm going to start, and I'm going to probably do about a 10-part series on how I actually built out this entire system from start to finish, from bringing in the data to actually building out the search results the way we wanted. And I'm really excited about this. This is the type of thing that gets me really, really energized. And I've been waiting for a client to give me the kind of money I need to do this, so I'm going to use it to its full benefit from that side. So we've talked a little bit about the structure side, but I really want to get to it. And you'll probably notice that anybody that was in my sessions yesterday really didn't get, you didn't hear any of my humor in those pieces, because I was talking about work stuff and building stuff and that. And I personally myself don't always get that excited about it. What I get excited about is the people stuff. And so you'll probably hear my smart ass side start to come out here with this. So how many of you think that in your world of collaboration and that kind of stuff, getting people adoption into your systems, how many of you think your organization does that really well? And that's about the number that I hear most of the time. So one of the biggest struggles we have is trying to figure out how to get people to use the things we build and not just hate them. Well, the first thing I have to tell you is I have to give you a little reality check, because the number one thing that people come into my sessions is they get mad because I didn't give them that silver bullet that was going to answer all their questions. So the first thing is there is no secret sauce. There is no special way to do it that's going to be better than anywhere else. There are a lot of proven techniques to be able to do it. But the one thing I've learned as a consultant, having worked with a ton of different organizations that have a ton of different types of people, that have a ton of different types of culture, is that every single one is different. Every single one is different, and you have to understand that, because going and finding somebody else's stuff, copying and pasting it and thinking that that's going to be your answer, well, if you happen to be the lucky few, that might actually work. But overall, you have to put effort into adoption to get people to use your stuff. And so to gain their acceptance depends on a lot of variables. Different organizations need different things to be able to make things successful. In that. And so from that side, you've got to really learn this. Now, going through our entire process that we've talked up to date, you're going to know a lot about what your people want. And if you actually build a system that they want, that's actually a really great step forward in the adoption. If all of a sudden they go to that home page and they see links and lists and everything to things they actually wanted to see, you're going to find they actually like it. If the first thing they see is the president pontificating about something that he did, you know, he went to China for some type of ambassadorial mission so that you guys could sell more product there, and the person down on the factory line is like, oh, that's great, I don't really care about that. And there, you've got to do that. So that right there is a huge thing. But from the other side is you have to start really understanding your organization, understanding your people to really do this. So there is really no secret sauce. The other thing is adoption cannot be an afterthought. There is nothing more annoying than when I go into an organization and they were like, well, we launched our intranet and then we started an adoption strategy. It's like, oh, I bet that went well. No, it didn't. We can't figure it out. You cannot try to get people to want to like your system after you've launched it. Because the world is about what people are, and that is they don't like change. People don't like things to be different. They don't like to do it. There are some people in here like me that probably remember the green screen apps that we used to use back in the day and stuff. And even though when we saw the first GUIs, and we were like, oh, these are really cool. But people were like, oh, no. I just want to type here and click that number, and it pulls up another screen and click up another number, that kind of stuff. And it was like, no, this is so much better. You can use a mouse. You can do all these cool things. But people don't want this stuff. They don't like to change. So you have to make sure that your adoption strategy is part of your overall project process. As a matter of fact, with a lot of organizations, especially our government clients, we start that sometimes at the day one that we start actually doing any type of project with them, is we actually start preparing people for what's coming and the benefits that's going to happen. So you have to set a good timetable for that, and you have to remember that different projects may need different adoption strategies. If you're a global company and you're rebuilding an entire global intranet and you have offices in 26 countries around the world, do you not think that you probably need to let people know that before you launch it? I've dealt with a lot of companies that never did in that. And so we've got to go through this. So I kind of share here a sample adoption timeline. And I know people probably are going to be like, there's too much information to write down. Don't worry, everybody does get these slides afterwards, so there's some good samples on here. But honestly, we'll start all the way 6 months out, really actually letting people know what's going to be happening, how it's going to be happening, where it's going to be happening, how things are going to change and everything else. And you've got to have this kind of overall elaborate process about what you're doing. But you'll see it starts way before we even launch the project in that, but then it continues on after launch. You've got to have a strategy about, okay, how we're going to get people ready for this. Now that they're not quite as nervous because we've shown them that things might not be that bad, well then how do we get them to understand what this is going to be? And then it launches, how do we get them to know that we didn't just launch it and then turn off our phones and walk away and say that we'll never talk to you again? And so people have a lot of anxiety, especially when new technology gets brought into an organization, because they think IT only builds shit. They don't support it, which means if I don't like it, I'm going to send in, they're going to say, well, call the support desk, and they'll run a ticket, and we'll look at that ticket, and we'll bring it to our governance meeting, and our governance team meets once every quarter, but we can get you 2 quarters from now, and we'll talk about that, and then we'll bring it to a committee that'll have a discussion about that, and then we'll have to look at how it rolls out on our servers, and we'll get you in the server update in Q2 of 4 years from now. And you think I'm joking, but I know there's people in this room that have said that exact same thing because that's what we do. We launch these projects and then we think, well, we did it, we're done, we can move on to our next topic and we forget that this is such a huge step, is what happens after things actually go live. And so you always have to realize this overall from adoption strategy is that changing behavior is really what's hardest. When we build people-centered environments, it helps alleviate a little bit of that because we actually have something that they wanted. But no matter what, you're still going to have those people in your organization that are just scared of this change and because changing behavior is a constant process, there's always something that's going to go. And yesterday I talked about this, but I cannot stress this enough. There is such a large generational divide in our workforce today. And it's going to stay big in that. And for the people that weren't in my session yesterday, I said 2008 really changed a lot of the world for a lot of people. There are a lot of people that thought about retiring that are no longer thinking about retiring, that are having to continue on in their careers a lot longer. So as you go through that and you're bringing in the 20-somethings and then you've got the 70-somethings working in there, the generational gap between that is very huge. And they all have different wants and needs and they all have different comfort levels in that from there. So you have to understand that stuff. But most of all, people need a reason to adopt something. And the reason is not, we're launching a new piece of software. Learn it. But that's what IT likes because we're all scared of people. It's like, well, we're just going to do it. We thought this had cool things. I saw it when I clicked the button, it spun around and jumped up on the screen. And Microsoft said that I could do something really cool with this. And my bosses said, yeah. They showed me how I could look at everything on a phone, and I could pull up all my data charts, and I could do all that kind of stuff. And we get all excited about it. And then our people go on there, and they're like, this is useless. I can't find anything. I can't do anything. I don't want to use it. So we have to find that reason, and we have to give them a reason. As a matter of fact, one of the funniest things, and I'm going to talk about it in the communication part, that I laugh at is when we do training. When we do training around IT things, the only thing we teach people is what to do. We never teach them why this is actually going to be helpful for them to do anything around the adoption side. So, but going along with that, sometimes quick change is okay, but you have to realize what you're going through. I do actually believe there are organizations out there that the whole saying, pull off the Band-Aid quickly, actually is not a bad idea, because there are organizations that get so caught up in the nervousness around change that if you try to do it over a long period of time, you'll just never get anywhere. So I've been in organizations where we've built adoption strategies around, okay, we're going to show it to them really briefly beforehand. We're going to rip off the Band-Aid, but then you have to have activities around there to support that. And so that, again, is what not happens a lot as you roll it out in there. And just because so the last one here, and the only purpose here is, it's really funny, is that we go into a lot of organizations, they put a lot of effort to do these projects so much better and go people-centered and that kind of stuff. And then they launch them, and people are still so critical of them, and they don't understand why. And, well, you got to realize also that there's always a history behind this. If SharePoint is the very first project your IT department has ever rolled out, in a brand new internet that you did people-centered and it was perfect, then you may not get any criticism. But in most organizations, they've rolled out some things that haven't went real well, and then they get it. So just because you've changed doesn't mean people will believe you. Just because you're saying, no, we finally did it right this time, doesn't mean that people will always take that at face value. You have to put some effort into it, especially there. And I think there's no part of any organization that loses more trust than IT. And that's because most people don't go into IT because they said, you know, I really want to work with people on a daily basis. And that's the problem is they're also the people that run all of our systems that all of our people use, and it's the most important thing for them. And so you have to understand that this change is something that needs to occur, but you've got to be willing to put in the time and effort to do that. You can bring in other resources, but overall, it's so very critical. Because you can build a great system, but if you still don't get your people to buy into it, it doesn't really matter what you're going to do. So that brings me to my last piece, and that's called communication. And so the first thing I want to say, how many in here would really consider himself like a true IT person? Now, come on, raise your hand, be proud. Yeah, I'll pick on you, but that's okay. The first thing I want to say is communication is not email. Communication is voice. Communication is looking at somebody. Communication is actually communicating. Sending somebody a 20-page email that lays out everything that you're going to do for a project is not something that works. And that's very important because a lot of times we like to take communication down to the level of comfort that we have, which is I'll send you an email. Therefore, if you're mad, you're just going to send me an email back, and I can just be like, okay, I can ignore that for a little bit. And there. Communication is key. If you want to be successful in these type of projects and build people-centered environments, you have to communicate out to your people. And you have to tell the world what you're doing. You can't try to hide the things you're doing and keep it to yourself. You have to let them know what's going on with that. And no more projects under the radar. I said that yesterday. There is nothing more annoying than when I go into an organization, it's like, yeah, you know, we know we're going to get some pushback from this group, and this group. So we're just going to kind of bring this in under the radar and then launch it, and then we'll just get them figured out, sorted out later. And that does not work. You have to be able to communicate and be able to do things. And so the fun thing about it is communication does not have to be boring. So you heard me talk about that engineering group that spent a bunch of money with me to go through and build this really easy system so that they didn't really have to think before they actually put content in there. Well, on the other side, this was their communication campaign. And I got to tell you, not only was this probably one of the most fun creative communication campaigns I did, I actually used to own part of an engineering company, so I know engineers really well. And I was like, it actually went over really well. And it went over really well because the CIO, what he did is he actually sent out these communications. He decided he was going to be the person that sent it. And so we drew up all these comics, and we had negative Ned and positive Patty that brought it in there. And so he'd say, well, I'm really nervous about this, and do that. And everybody in here that thinks this is silly, you're absolutely right. But guess what? It was silly enough that you got a bunch of engineers to read it and actually learn from it. And that's the thing is you have to be creative, you have to be out there, you have to take a risk. And so he sent out the very first email, and he says, to all my fellow employees across the world, I'm not sure who put this together, but I do know that that person wants to keep their job past today. So he wrote this whole thing about how he was worried about that he was going to lose his job, but he thought this was a really creative idea and that they might actually read something versus just some generic email that had 27 bullet points in there that he knew everybody goes to delete right away and that kind of stuff. Probably one of the more successful communication campaigns we've ever participated in because it reached out and it did something different. It caught people's attention. Sending them an email that's even in a form of a newsletter is the easiest way to get something deleted in an organization. In that, unless it's something that's pertinent to them at that exact moment. How many people here get more than 5 emails a day? Exactly. My point exactly. You've got to look at this and kind of do things on there. And you've got to vary the communication avenues. You can't just go one direction. You've got to really tailor those to your unique audiences and the way they think about things. You have to do it. You know, you could have email campaigns, in-person sessions, knowledge centers where people go to learn about things on their own, project status updates, all these different types of things. Even a social strategy. We did a rollout with an organization that actually we ended up doing a lot of things across their Facebook page and their Twitter account because people paid more attention to that than the internet because they hated the internet. So they wouldn't go look at project updates on the internet, but they followed the company on Twitter to find out what was going on. And we started pushing them to different places along that lines. And that it actually was a very good use of social strategy. But you need to continually enforce that need for change. This is going to happen. What's it going to do to benefit you? How's it going to help you? What are some of the anxieties that you might have? How is that not going to happen? That kind of stuff. You can go through all these different steps and really kind of do it. And so a big part of communication is learning. And I'm starting to come down, and I think I'm actually down to my last couple slides. So this is actually going to be perfect again. But learning is a lifelong endeavor. And so one of the biggest things that I say from that side, and I said it earlier, is you have to train the why. In that, because learning and teaching people stuff is just as important as communicating out to them. Again, I've said before, if you're building a people-centered system and you have to teach them how to use the homepage of your intranet, you probably already failed because you shouldn't have to do that. But there are still things you need to help them do. You need to help the content contributors get better. You need to help the people understand more around where they do their different activities in that. And you have to put a training plan together that really makes sense from that side and get people involved so that they really understand what it's going to go. So some things that I love to do is not sit there and create a class that people can sit down in, but I actually love to create learning hubs. And so learning hubs tend not to be around finding information. Learning hubs tend to be around how we do the other side of this. So now we've built an intranet, but we've got our team sites, we've got all those different components out there. And it's amazing how many times I go into business users and I talk to them and I say something like, and then you can actually go in here to this list and you can set up an alert so that you know when that's changed. What? You're saying I could actually have the system let me know that that changed so then I don't have to go and constantly check it and it'll actually send me an email? Yep. Really? Can I do it to more than just one thing? Yeah. Could I do it in more than one places? Yeah. The thing that has been around since 2001 sometimes is one of the most mesmerizing things to business users in that. And so having these type of things, we like to put suggestion places where a lot of times in intranets we'll have some place up at the top where somebody can actually create a suggestion. It's like, oh, I learned something. Let me add this as a quick fact. Don't only do it yourself. Share real life case studies. This works really large. This works really well in enterprise when they have really large systems and they have different business units doing different things. Getting them to write case studies, you're doing two things. One, you're making the people that built it feel really good because we did something cool and now we can share it with the whole organization. But the other side is you're helping to help other parts of the organization understand what they can do. Because a lot of times when people don't talk, they don't know one another, everything like that. So you have a lot of it. Just-in-time training. There's a just-in-time training company right upstairs that I think might be somewhere along here. And that does that very well. I am a huge proponent of just-time training. Instead of bringing people and sitting them down in a room and talking to them for 4 hours and then them going back to their real jobs and not trying to do anything you taught them for the next 6 weeks, and then 6 weeks later they're emailing and saying, I remember you talked about this, but I don't remember how to do this. Can you come over and stop by my desk and tell me how to do this? And that having it where it's like, if I need to create a list, if I need to create a list item, if I need to create an alert, if I need to follow something, and that I can learn that at that very moment versus having to go through the whole things. And just remember that technical skills don't always equal business skills. It's not always about the technical skills. It's also about the way we do it in business. How do you write good content? How do you do good things? How do you really build out a good site structure? That's not a technical thing. That's about how you really understand it from a business angle and what the things to do. So from a communication standpoint, it's not only about telling people, but it's giving them the resources to learn some of this stuff on their own. Because if you have a good intranet, you're probably at least going to have one or two things that are a little bit more complex in nature, that is not about just clicking on a form, but you're going to have something, maybe it's a workflow process or something in their team sites layer or whatever it might be that's really critical, and you really want to put that in place. And so I lied. I actually have one slide that is actually a duplicate from my previous session, and that's because I think it's pretty much the most important slide that I can do it. So once you're done with all this and you've got everything in place, like I said before, you have to pay attention to this stuff. It drives me crazy because, and trust me, I build these things all the time. And even though I get paid to do it outside there, I know how exhausting at the end of a process of a big project build it is. But that doesn't mean you should stop paying attention to it. But that's what a lot of us do. It's like, it's launched, okay, that goes over here. I don't have to worry about it anymore, and I don't have to do anything more about it. And so the number one thing that kills even good intranets, good systems, good public websites and everything is that 6-month break you take after the project where you try not to even remember that you did it so that you can detox in your own mind and own body in that, and then all of a sudden your users are unhappy. We just had a project that the client, we worked and worked and worked, and they spent all their budget, and for 6 months they moved on to another project, never looked back at this, and then they let their content contributors do things, and they were like, well, at 6 months we'll do a refresh check and see what our content contributors did. Well, guess what? They did a lot of really bad things in those 6 months. And so now they're going back and actually having to redo a lot of stuff because they didn't want to pay attention because they were so tired because the project took like 18 months and they were like, oh, I don't want to look at this site anymore. As a matter of fact, I can tell you that in all the years I've done this, there's not one design we've ever launched that by the time that design launched, I didn't hate it. Because I've looked at it 5 million times in 6 months. So, but you've got to pay attention, and whether it's you or whether it's somebody else on your team or another group, you've got to have somebody that's doing that continual process at the end of the cycle to really kind of make it good. So, well, I think I'm 30 seconds ahead this time, so I really hit it well this time. But thank you guys very much. We are at 10 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and switch over to Paul here and let him take over. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to just talk to me right after this or grab me sometime today. I'll be around this afternoon. But thank you all very much, especially 9 a.m. after the attendee party. So.